Good day, everybody. It is I, the Desert Viking, and today we're going to have a little conversation on a controversial topic involving Lucifer and Ahriman. Controversial in that if you hold a dogmatic position on what those things are, this will be this will conflict with your belief or your belief structure. And I feel compelled to give this little talk because you can see this present in today's world, and I think that it's something that should at least be considered or talked about. Now, before we go farther, you can research Lucifer and Ahriman. There's not a whole lot out there. In fact, the concept of this first came up for me in a couple of different YouTube videos that I had found. I will say this, that I always try to give you the sources of where I'm getting my information from so that you can do your own research. One of my bugbears, so to speak, is videos or books where authors don't cite their references, and it seems like they're like coming up with this on their own. The concept of Lucifer and Ahriman was first positioned, as far as I can tell, by a guy named Rudolf Steiner. And Rudolf Steiner was a theosophist way back at the late 19th and early 20th centuries and formed his own society, which still exists today, the I can never pronounce the word, Anthroposophists, which is a version of theosophy. Theosophy, as a philosophy, became very popular in the 19th and 20th centuries, and I have found forms a cornerstone of structure or a rooted belief system for a lot of Western esotericism today, to include the New Age movement. So a lot of what you hear people talk about today from like the New Age movement or whatnot, odds are you can find their root in theosophy or Rudolf Steiner's work. And with Lucifer and Ahriman, that's definitely the case. The thing with Rudolf Steiner is Rudolf Steiner was considered to be a brilliant orator and a genius, and he helped clarify, in quotes, some things or bring some things. He crystallized some concepts to make them easier to understand. The thing with Steiner, much like Madame Blavatsky, who founded Theosophy, is that a lot of their information comes from what I like to call the trust me bro method, which is they channeled a lot of that information. And by channeling, that means they went off somewhere and meditated, and it came to them from the masters or from whatever. So I call that trust me bro. Now, bearing in mind that the holy writings themselves were channeled. So when you talk about how God has influenced the Bible, that's also trust me, bro. Trust me, God influenced me. And so you have to keep a skeptical mind for all of that. And a lot of people will bash on Rudolf Steiner for pseudoscience, as they call it, because he talks about channeling Atlantis and lands before Atlantis. And he's got writings on what happened in the Atlantean periods, and that he calls us, right now we're in the 5th post-Atlantean epoch, which was started in the mid-1500s. And he comes off as if he's an authority or this has come from somewhere definitive, but he channeled this. So keep that in mind for your own belief structures, your own, however you want to contemplate and comprehend what I'm about to talk about. That's where it came from. Now, if anyone out there knows of earlier writings on Lucifer and Ahriman in the context in which we're talking about here, please enlighten me. But right now, these come from a series. What I'm about to talk about comes from a series of lectures that he gave in the like 1917 through 1919, 1920 area. Lucifer and Ahriman are two opposing entities. And there's a reason why I have the tree of life up on my shoulder here, because the tree of life represents the trinity of the energies around us every day. The black pillar of strength represents Ahriman. The white pillar of beauty represents Lucifer. And the middle pillar of wisdom represents Christ in this cosmology that we're going to talk about. Ahriman is a Persian demon, basically. That's where the name comes from. And Ahrimanic energy is black, not to denote that it's evil, but Ahrimanic energy from a positive, negative, from a polarity standpoint. Polarity is what keeps the world intact. It is the tension of the polarities that keep a framework on our reality. The Ahrimanic energy is materialistic. It's very materialistic. It's rooted in the five senses. It's rooted in what you can see, you can prove. It's rooted in raw numbers. It's rooted in statistics. It's rooted in technology. That is Ahrimanic energy. Luciferic energy is spiritual energy. It is the desire to be free. It is the desire to ascend to the divine. It is what enables us to contemplate on a spiritual level the world and all of the things therein at a level beyond which the senses can denote. I always like to point this out that, a couple hundred years ago, the concept, maybe even a little bit longer than that, but the concept of tiny little organisms that could make people sick was deemed blasphemy and heresy. Today we call those bacteria and virus, but we can't see them with our eyes, so therefore they didn't exist. That was a laugh. X-rays, radio waves, we can't see them, but we know they exist through science. A few hundred years ago, that was all pseudoscience. A few hundred years ago, it was known that the sun revolved around the earth, and to say otherwise would land you in hot water with the church. Reference Galileo. He had a bad time with the church because he posited that the earth revolves around the sun, and that was heresy. And so it's important to know that there are things all around us that we know exist that we can't see. There's colors on the spectrum we can't see. There are sounds that we cannot hear, but we know they exist. The world is full of things that exist that we cannot sense with our senses. And science is starting to move back towards esotericism and starting to prove some of those esoteric principles correct. Quantum physics proving other dimensions exist, for example, overlaid on top of each other. The theory that we live in a simulation, the theory that time and space aren't real or that they're subjective. These are all esoteric principles that we believe, that esoterics believe in, essentially. So Lucifer and Ahriman are two opposing forces that are tugging against each other. And the Christ is in the middle. It's the balance. There is a thing in Western esotericism that we call the arcanum. And the arcanum's secret is that you have to balance those two things out. You have to walk in the middle. You have to have a balance. Alchemy is the same way. You have to have a balance between these two forces. If you are unbalanced, you will fail. You are not ready to move on. In martial arts, you have to have balance or you will fail. Martial arts is steeped heavily in Eastern esotericism, the ki or the chi, or I'm corrected every time I use that word, but there are things that those people can do that seem supernatural and extraordinary, like putting their fist through 6 blocks of concrete, that they can do through tremendous exertions of will and life force. And they demonstrate this. We've seen this. You can watch videos on it. I've seen it in person. So Steiner calls those energies Lucifer and Ahriman. Another secret of Western esotericism is that Lucifer and Ahriman don't represent an individual being. And that will conflict with religious ideologies because we're taught that Lucifer is the devil and he's a being and he sits in hell and looks like a goat and all that other nonsense. Now, Steiner did say that Lucifer and Ahriman and Christ all incarnated in this world at different times for different reasons, for different purposes. He claims that Lucifer was incarnated 3 millennia before Christ, so 3,000 years before Christ. Lucifer was a man born in China. He claims he was born in China. And by the coming of Lucifer, man was able to spiritually, they were at their spiritual height. They were able to see things or understand things in a way much different than we do today. When Christ was born 3,000 years later, during the epoch of the Greeks and the Romans, Steiner calls that the fourth post-Atlantean epoch, which ended, he claims, at 800 BC. And from 800 BC, 800 BC started it to the 1500s. That was the fourth post-Atlantean epoch. And in this Greco-Roman era, Christ came about to mediate the powers of Lucifer, to balance them, to bring balance. And it was from that, in that era, that we were able to understand Christ's message through that spiritual lens, which we cannot comprehend today. And through the Roman Church and everything that has progressed for the last 2,000 years, the pendulum has swung to materialism. And starting from the Age of Enlightenment in the 1500s, where science and senses really came about to be, if I can't see it, it's not real. Everything became about technology and commerce and economy. And that is so true today. I would challenge anyone to say otherwise. Spirituality today, amongst most people, is a dying ember. Today is more focused on survival. We're trying to survive. We're trying to make enough money to survive. And people are very concerned about money, amassing as much of it as they can, status, celebrity status, sex, all of the physical material pleasures, comfort. That's our primary goal today. That's Ahriman. Now, Hermetic wisdom teaches us the law of rhythm. And the law of rhythm is a pendulum. The law of rhythm states that everything cycles. Everything's in a cycle. And you've heard of things like the turnings, like we're in the fourth turning. Mankind, if you look at the history of our societies, has repeated itself over and over again. Well, the same thing here with these two principles. We are penduluming back and forth. So now the pendulum is swinging heavily towards Ahriman. But like everything, the pendulum will return. It takes a while. It's a lot longer than a human lifetime. But we are in a descent right now. Not only are we in a descent, this descent is required. For humanity to progress forward, we have to destroy ourselves over and over again. Us destroying ourselves over and over again is how we learn. Now, it is said, via channeling, via the Akashic records, that Atlantis, roughly in their fourth post-Lemurian epoch, learned how to channel the powers of life and death. He goes into things called elementals. Elementals live in the etheric. They're very destructive. They are what Western esotericism keeps as a secret, because if everyone knew how to access them, so he says, so it goes, we would make a mess of things. Well, the Atlanteans allegedly knew how to access those and made a mess of things, and that required their destruction. And so it was. And now we are the fifth, per theosophy, we are the fifth generation of humans, and there will be 7 total. So we know we are also destined to be destroyed. Whether that means we will destroy ourselves in the current era, or if we still have a few hundred more years or 1,000 years or however long to go, if we're in the fifth post-Atlantean epoch, I like to think in terms of 7, so I think that we still have a lot longer to go to learn, but we will eventually destroy ourselves through our own technology, through our own blowing ourselves up, everything that we do. But that's required. That is a requirement for us learning. If we don't do those things, we don't learn. If you don't have bad things happen to you, you don't learn. That obviously sucks if you live today, because we have to live through an unpleasant time. Most of us will. And that's kind of what I wanted to posit today. That the lesson, as the pendulum is swinging back to Ahriman, and has for the past 500 years or so, that this is a requirement. And that if you want to, the Hermetic law of rhythm is recognize rhythms, and you want to ride atop those rhythms, not be destroyed by them, not be washed away by them. Now, whether you believe in the Luciferic or Ahrimanic energies, it's really on you. That's your own thing. I would advise reading some of his lectures. Again, Lucifer and Ahriman one's a Abrahamic concept, and the other one is a Persian concept. Lucifer, we don't know. Lucifer was never meant to be a proper name of someone. We're doing some research on one of my next books. Hopefully it will be on the history of Lucifer and where that all came from. But to give you the TLDR, too long didn't read, the short version of Lucifer does not appear in the Holy Text in all the translations. It appears in some of them. It appears one time in the Bible in some translations, and it is used to describe King Nebuchadnezzar, who was a Babylonian king who brought upon the destruction of the Temple of Solomon and enslaved the Jews. And the word in Hebrew is used to designate Venus, the morning star. It's a bright star. And the point of that passage in the Bible is to connect King Nebuchadnezzar with Venus's rise and fall, meaning as Venus rises in the sky, it quickly falls. So too will King Nebuchadnezzar. And that word Lucifer is a Latin term. It's composed of two different words, meaning the light, lux, and then the other part, bearer, or the bearer of light. Is how it comes into being. And from that point, that's pretty much the only thing that the Bible talks about, right, in terms of Lucifer. It's never actually associated with the devil. Satan is talked about in the Bible, but the word Satan just simply means the enemy. So that's kind of like running around saying, my name is enemy. There is nothing in the Bible talking about the war in heaven, not really. And I always used to ask that question in Catholic school because I was a Catholic. Where are all these archangels and the war in heaven? Where's that? There's a book somewhere. Where is it? Because people talk about it like it was a thing. And I was always told by the nuns, stop asking stupid questions. Well, some of the Gnostic texts talk about a war in heaven, which is funny considering the Gnostics were deemed heresy and they were killed, burned, and all of their writings burned and hidden away. The Gnostic texts talk a little bit about the war in heaven, not a whole lot. The book of Enoch talks about the angels that defied God, and they came to earth and they had sex with women and had baby giants, and so we know about that. The head angel, the head of the rebel angels, was not Lucifer or Satan, it was Azazel. So he actually had a name in the book of Enoch. Tracing back a war on heaven, currently in my studies, I've gotten to the Bogomils. The Bogomils were a Gnostic sect that came about around the year 1000, and they were a very strong force in Europe for about 400 or 500 years until Bulgaria, etc., was conquered. And they were persecuted, much like the Cathars were in Europe, and they had crusades launched against them. So the crusades weren't just about going to the Middle East and taking Jerusalem and all that. Crusades were called to rampage through Europe and exterminate religious sects that the church didn't like. And the Bogomils had a legend that dealt with the war in heaven. And the Cathars kind of talked a little bit as well. Now, those two sects, which were both destroyed, the Bogomils converted to Islam, and the Cathars were basically wiped out by the Crusades, are said to have given rise to the Rosicrucians, the Freemasons, the Knight Templar. Those are all allegedly rooted in the Bogomils. So if you're interested in your history ladder and you want to know where things stemmed from, there they go. I'll do a thing on the Knights Templar later. That's beyond the scope of what we're talking about here. But they had the legend of the fall of heaven. Now, from that point, it looks like the church borrows from the Gnostic tradition, that same tradition it deemed as heresy and killed. So the irony is not lost upon me. And around 1300s, there was a guy named Dante who wrote a little piece called the Inferno. And the Inferno described hell and all the levels of hell. And then a few hundred years later, there was a guy named Milton who wrote a piece called Paradise Lost, which fleshed out the story of Lucifer, of the devil, and the war in heaven. And so it's evolved through those channels. And so it's separate from the Bible, but a lot of what we know about the war in heaven comes from Gnostic tradition, mixed with fantasy fiction of the age. That's what I can call it. It's what they channeled. They Trust Me Brode wrote the 7 levels of hell and put faces on things. But that's where we get Lucifer as being the devil. And then in the 1800s, in 1850-something, 1851, 1852, Eliphas Levi drew the infamous Baphomet. The infamous Baphomet, the goat, which would later be absorbed by the Satanic Church as their emblem. And the Baphomet has nothing to do with the devil, which is a travesty. But today, it is burned in our brains from that chain on. Luciferic energy just deals with extreme spirituality. Ahrimanic energy deals with extreme materialism. Whether you think that's an actual person or an entity or a being, Steiner talks about that those beings crystallize and form a man. But those are energies in place. And what we have to do is we have to take that energy and we have to mediate between them, and we have to basically consolidate our materialistic side with our spiritual side, because anything in excess is bad. Energy by itself is not good nor evil. It just is. Fire is not good or evil. It can be used for good and it can be used for evil. Extreme spirituality by itself is not bad. Extreme spirituality untethers you from the world. We're supposed to be in the material world. We are supposed to be learning and living and gaining experience. Too much materialism at the expense of spirituality is a hollow, dead life. And some would argue that if you're a Gnostic, that's the archons, and that's how they keep you here, through pleasure and comfort. We have to be uncomfortable. We have to be able to be put and willing to be put through the forge, to be forged into something new. We have to accept the trials that are sent to us as learning experiences, as good things. Even though they seem horrible at the time, they are ultimately good. They are advancing us. And stagnation comes from too much comfort and too much pleasure and too much materialism. So again, I'm going to wrap this up. Lucifer and Ahriman as energies. Rudolf Steiner talks about this. This is a theosophical concept. You can find books on it. Not a whole lot, but you can find some. And you can definitely find some YouTube videos from people who talk about it. Most of them actually, I'm not going to say none, but none of the ones I have saw actually give credit to where that came from. It took some digging to find that. But if that's something that interests you, go check it out. I've presented both sides of how people saw Rudolf Steiner and the goods and the bads. A lot of this is channeled again. So you have to take that knowledge with that information, knowing that this is something that he was told by something, which to a lot of people is unprovable. But a lot of this resonates with me like a bell. So as it resonates with me, I am sharing it with you. Thank you for tuning in. Anything you'd like to talk about revolving and concerning Lucifer and Ahriman, please leave a message, leave a comment. If you like this content, drop me a subscribe. I appreciate it. Until then, we have much more to discuss on this channel, so stay tuned and we'll see you then.